Welcome to True Crime Cases today. We are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. Amora was the embodiment of elegance and wealth, living in a sprawling mansion in an affluent suburb. She was accustomed to the finer things in life. Recently divorced from a high-profile businessman, Amara found herself navigating the unfamiliar territory of singlehood at the age of 44. Her days were filled with charity events, shopping sprees, and lonely evenings, sipping expensive wine in her opulent home. It was during one of these evenings that she noticed her new neighbor, young man in his early 21s who had just moved into the house next door. His name was Ryan, a college student working part-time to support his studies. The contrast between their lives intrigued Amora. Ryan's youthful energy and carefree attitude were a stark contrast to the stuffy, predictable world she had inhabited for so long. Their first interaction was innocent enough, a casual greeting as they both tended to their respective gardens. But Amora couldn't help but feel a spark, something she hadn't felt in years. Ryan's boyish charm and easygoing nature drew her in, and soon she found herself seeking out opportunities to engage him in conversation. Ryan, flattered by the attention of an older, sophisticated woman, reciprocated. What started as innocent banter quickly turned into something more as Amora invited him over for coffee. The casual visits became frequent and their conversations grew deeper. Amora was captivated by Ryan's stories of his struggles and aspirations, and Ryan was drawn to the allure of her wealth and the sense of security she provided. It wasn't long before the attraction between Amora and Ryan became undeniable. One evening, after particularly long and intense conversation over a bottle of wine, Amora made the first move. She leaned in, brushing her lips against Ryan's in a way that was both tentative and daring. Ryan responded, and what followed was a night of passion that neither of them had anticipated. The affair began in earnest, with Amora and Ryan meeting in secret at her mansion whenever they could. The thrill of the forbidden relationship was intoxicating for both of them. For Amora, it was a chance to recapture her lost youth and experience a kind of love she hadn't felt in years. For Ryan, it was an opportunity to enjoy the luxuries he had never known, all while being involved with a woman who made him feel important and desired. Amora showered Ryan with expensive gifts, designer clothes, watches, even a car. She enjoyed playing the role of the benefactor, and Ryan, though initially hesitant, accepted these gifts with increasing regularity. He began to rely on her generosity, seeing it as a way to improve his life and secure his future. But beneath the surface, tensions were beginning to build. Amora's feelings for Ryan were deepening, and with them came an increasing need to control the relationship. As their affair continued, Ryan began to realize the extent of Amora's obsession with him. At first it was flattering. She would call him multiple times a day, send him affectionate texts, and plan extravagant weekends for the two of them. But soon her behavior became more possessive. She started demanding more of his time, insisting that he prioritize her over everything else, including his studies and friends. Ryan, who had initially seen the relationship as a fun distraction, started to feel the weight of Amora's expectations. He realized that Amora was no longer just a lover. She was trying to control every aspect of his life. Ryan, however, was not as emotionally invested as Amora. His initial interest had been sparked by the novelty of the relationship and the material benefits that came with it. But as Amora's demands grew, Ryan began to feel trapped In the back of his mind, Ryan began to devise a plan to extricate himself from the relationship without losing the financial support Amora provided. He started subtly distancing himself, canceling plans, and making excuses about being busy with school. Worker Amora noticed the change, and in a bid to keep him close, offered even more extravagant gifts and promises of a future together. But the more she gave, the more Ryan began to resent the strings attached. Amora and Ryan's clandestine relationship didn't go unnoticed by the neighbors. The upscale neighborhood was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other's business. Amora's lavish lifestyle and frequent male visitors had always been a topic of gossip, but the sight of a much younger man coming and going at all hours sparked new rumors. At first, the whispers were harmless, curious neighbors speculating about the nature of Amora and Ryan's relationship. But as the months passed, the gossip turned more malicious. Some neighbors pitted Amora, viewing her as a desperate woman, clinging to her youth through an ill-advised affair. Others were more judgmental, considering Ryan a gold digger exploiting an older woman for her wealth. The gossip reached its peak when a neighborhood watch member saw Ryan leaving Amora's house late one night. The story spread like wildfire, and soon everyone was talking about the sugar mommy and her boy toy. Unbeknownst to Amora, her once respected reputation in the community was rapidly deteriorating. She became the subject of pity, scorn, and ridicule, an object of fascination for the bored suburban elite. The more Ryan pulled away, the more desperate Amora became to hold on to him. She began making an increasingly irrational decisions driven by a fear of losing the one thing that brought excitement and joy back into her life. She stopped attending social events and distanced herself from her friends, many of whom had grown suspicious of her relationship with Ryan. Amora's entire world began to revolve around Ryan. She spent hours planning elaborate dates, buying gifts, and thinking of ways to keep him entertained. Her obsession grew to the point where she could no longer focus on anything else. Her business ventures suffered, and she started neglecting her personal health and well-being. All that mattered was Ryan and the time they spent together. But Ryan, feeling more suffocated by the day, started to push back. He refused Amora's invitations more frequently and became less responsive to her messages. He even began spending more time with friends his own age, trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in his life. This only fueled Amora's paranoia. She started to suspect that Ryan was seeing someone else, and the thought drove her to the brink of madness. As Amora's behavior grew more erratic, Ryan found himself at a crossroads. He had enjoyed the perks of their relationship, the money, the gifts, the luxurious lifestyle. But now the cost was becoming too high. Amora's constant demands and emotional manipulation were taking a toll on him. He began to dread their meetings, feeling trapped by her obsessive love. Ryan confided in a close friend, revealing the true nature of his relationship with Amora. His friend warned him that the situation was dangerous, that Amora's obsession could lead to something catastrophic if he didn't find a way out. Ryan knew this deep down, but he was also afraid of what would happen if he left her. He had become accustomed to the life Amora had provided, and the thought of losing it was daunting. In a bid to regain some control, Ryan started seeing another woman, a fellow student named Emily. Their relationship was casual and uncomplicated, a stark contrast to the drama with Amora. Ryan found solace in Emily's company, enjoying the simplicity and freedom it offered. But he knew he was playing a dangerous game, one that could have serious consequences if Amora found out. Amora's suspicions about Ryan's infidelity reached a boiling point one evening after noticing that Ryan had been particularly distant. She confronted him. The conversation quickly turned into a heated argument, with Amora demanding to know where he had been and who he had been with. Ryan, tired of the constant accusations, admitted to seeing someone else. The confession shattered Amora. She had poured her heart, soul, and wealth into their relationship only to be betrayed. In a moment of desperation, she gave Ryan an ultimatum: end things with the other woman and commit to her fully, or she would expose their affair and ruin his life. Amora's voice was trembling, her eyes filled with tears, but there was an undercurrent of menace in her tone. Ryan was taken aback by the threat. He knew Amora had the means to carry it out. Her influence and connections could easily destroy his reputation and future, but he also knew that he couldn't continue living under her control. The situation had become untenable, and he needed to find a way out, no matter the cost. Determined to end the relationship on his terms, Ryan decided to push Amora to her breaking point. He began spending more time with Emily, intentionally flaunting their relationship in front of Amora. He hoped that by provoking her, she would break things off with him, allowing him to escape without having to sever ties completely. Amora, however, was not easily swayed. Her obsession with Ryan had reached such a level that she refused to let him go, no matter the humiliation. She watched in silent agony as Ryan and Emily's relationship blossomed, each public display of affection driving her deeper into despair. But instead of confronting him again, Amora decided to take matters into her own hands. She began to devise a plan to win Ryan back, a plan that involved eliminating the competition. Amora's thoughts turned dark as she contemplated what she needed to do to keep Ryan for herself. The once respected socialite was now a woman on the edge, willing to cross any line to maintain her hold on the man she loved. Amora's descent into madness culminated in a series of threatening messages sent to Ryan. In them, she warned him that if he didn't end things with Emily, there would be dire consequences. She hinted at harming herself, or worse, exposing secrets that could ruin both of their lives. The messages were erratic, filled with alternating pleas for forgiveness and chilling ultimatums. Ryan, realizing the situation was more serious than he had anticipated, started to fear for both his safety and Emily's. He tried to reason with Amora, promising to talk things through, but it was clear that she was no longer thinking rationally. The threats were becoming more frequent and more alarming, and Ryan knew he had to take action before it was too late. He decided to break things off with Amora once and for all, but he wanted to do it in a way that would minimize the fallout. He planned to meet her one last time, hoping to calm her down and end the relationship amicably. But as the meeting approached, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The night of the meeting, Ryan arrived at Amora's house with a sense of dread. The mansion, usually bustling with staff, was eerily quiet. Amora greeted him with a forced smile, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She led him to the living room, where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses were set on the table. They sat down, and Amora poured them each a drink. The conversation started awkwardly, with Ryan trying to keep things calm and neutral. But it wasn't long before Amora's emotions got the better of her. She started to cry, pleading with Ryan to stay with her, to give their relationship another chance. When Ryan gently refused, explaining that it was time for both of them to move on, Amora's demeanor shifted. In a sudden, unexpected move, Amora grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, which she had hidden earlier. She held it to her wrist, threatening to end her life if Ryan left her. Ryan, shocked and terrified, tried to talk her down, but Amora was beyond reason. The situation escalated quickly, with Ryan attempting to wrestle the knife from her hand. In the struggle, the knife slipped, and Amora was accidentally stabbed in the abdomen. She gasped in pain, her eyes wide with shock as she crumpled to the floor. Ryan, frozen in horror, stared at the blood spreading across her dress. Realizing the gravity of what had just happened, he panicked. Instead of calling for help, he fled the scene, leaving Amora to bleed out on the floor of her own home. Ryan drove aimlessly through the city, his mind racing with fear and guilt. He knew he should have called the police, but the thought of being arrested and having his life destroyed was too much to bear. Instead, he focused on covering his tracks. He disposed of the clothes he had been wearing, washed the blood off his hands, and tried to erase any evidence that could link him to the crime. As the night wore on, Ryan found himself parked in a secluded spot, his mind replaying the events over and over. He couldn't believe what had happened. The woman who had once showered him with affection and gifts was now lying dead. Because of him, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. But he knew he couldn't turn back now. He decided to leave the city, at least for a while. He needed to put as much distance between himself and the crime scene as possible. But as he drove through the night, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He was a fugitive, a murderer on the run, and there was no escaping the consequences. The following morning, Amora's body was discovered by her housekeeper, who immediately called the police. The scene was gruesome. A wealthy woman lying in a pool of blood with no apparent signs of a break-in. The police quickly ruled out robbery as a motive, and their attention turned to Amora's personal life. It didn't take long for the police to uncover the details of Amora's relationship with Ryan. Neighbors and acquaintances came forward describing the couple's tumultuous affair and Amora's increasingly erratic behavior. In the weeks leading up to her death, the gossip that had once been whispered behind closed doors was now front page news. The police issued a warrant for Ryan's arrest, but he was nowhere to be found. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected, and his social media accounts deleted. It was clear that Ryan had gone on the run, and the manhunt for him began in earnest. Ryan spent the next few weeks living like a ghost, moving from one cheap motel to another, using fake identities and cash to avoid detection. He had no real plan, only the desperate need to stay ahead of the authorities. Every time he heard a siren or saw a police car, his heart raced with fear. The guilt of what he had done weighed heavily on him. He couldn't sleep, plagued by nightmares of Amora's final moments. The once carefree young man was now shadow of his former self, paranoid and constantly looking over his shoulder. The life of luxury he had enjoyed with Amora was gone, replaced by a constant state of fear and uncertainty. As the weeks turned into months, Ryan's situation grew more dire. He was running out of money, and the stress of being a fugitive was taking a toll on his health. He became increasingly isolated, unable to trust anyone or form any kind of meaningful connection. The freedom he had sought was now a prison of his own. Making Ryan's life on the run eventually led him to a small, rundown town far from the city. Here he hoped to lay low and start anew, but his past continued to haunt him. The local news stations occasionally ran stories about Amora's death and the ongoing search for Ryan. reminding him that he was never truly safe. One day, while walking through the town's main street, Ryan spotted familiar face Emily. She had been searching for him ever since he disappeared, and now that she had found him, she was determined to get answers. Emily confronted Ryan, demanding to know what had happened between him and Amora. Ryan, exhausted and broken, confessed everything he told her about the affair, Amora's obsession, in the tragic night that led to her death. Emily, horrified by what she heard, urged him to turn himself in, but Ryan refused. He couldn't face the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. Desperate and cornered, Ryan made a decision that would seal his fate. He bid a tearful goodbye to Emily, telling her to forget about him and move on with her life. Then he fled once again, knowing that his time was running out. Ryan's journey finally brought him to a remote cabin in the mountains, a place where he could disappear completely, but the isolation only made his mental state worse. The memories of Amora's death, the guilt, and the fear all became too much to bear. Ryan began to lose touch with reality, haunted by visions of Amora and the life he had thrown away. It wasn't long before the police, who had been tracking Ryan's movements, closed in on his location. They surrounded the cabin, calling for him to surrender. Ryan, now at his breaking point, refused to come out. He barricaded himself inside, armed with a gun he had found in the cabin. A tense standoff ensued, with the police trying to talk Ryan down, but he was beyond reason. The guilt, fear, and despair had consumed him, and he saw no way out. In a final desperate act, Ryan turned the gun on himself, ending his life in a single tragic moment. With Ryan's death, the full story of Amora and Ryan's relationship came to light. The media had a field day with assorted details, painting Amora as a desperate, lonely woman and Ryan as a manipulative, opportunistic young man. The scandal rocked the community, leaving a permanent stain on the once respected neighborhood. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to Amora's death, they uncovered the extent of her obsession and the lengths she had gone to keep Ryan in her life. Friends and family members who had been kept in the dark were shocked by the revelations, struggling to reconcile the woman they knew with the one described in the reports. The story became a cautionary tale, a tragic example of how love, when twisted by obsession and control, can lead to destruction. Amora and Ryan had both paid the ultimate price for their choices, leaving behind a legacy of pain and regret. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Amora's children were left to pick up the pieces they had lost. Their mother, and now had to come to terms with the truth about her life and the choices she had made. The scandal had also left them dealing with the fallout from the media frenzy, with their family name now synonymous with a tragic affair. Emily, devastated by Ryan's death, returned to her life, but she was forever changed by the experience. She couldn't forget the man she had once cared for and the darkness that had ultimately consumed him. The small town where Ryan had spent his final days became a place of sorrow and reflection, a reminder of a life lost too soon. The neighborhood where Amora had once lived became a somber place. The once vibrant community, which had once been buzzing with gossip about Amora and Ryan, now faced a collective sense of mourning and discomfort. The mansion where Amora had lived was sold, and new occupants moved in, but the shadow of the tragic affair lingered. The stories and whispers would always be a part of the neighborhood's history. Amora's children, Lucas and Emily, struggled to come to terms with the fallout. They faced not only the personal loss of their mother, but also the public scandal that had tainted their family name. In an attempt to salvage what was left of their lives, they decided to leave the city and start anew elsewhere. It was a difficult decision, but they needed distance from the memories and the judgment of the community. The investigation into Almora and Ryan's affair concluded, but the case had left deep emotional scars on those involved. The police and investigators who had worked on the case were left grappling with the implications of the tragedy. They pondered the complexities of human relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession and controlled. The story of Almora and Ryan's ill-fated affair became a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the destructive potential of unchecked desires. Almora's desperate attempts to hold on to a fleeting moment of youth and Ryan's failure to extricate himself from a dangerous relationship led to a chain of events that ended in tragedy. In the years that followed, the story was recounted in various media outlets, documentaries, and even a few fictionalized adaptations. Each retelling sought to explore the psychological intricacies of the affair and the impact it had on everyone involved. The case served as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing emotional needs and maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships. Emily, who had once Ryan's beacon of normally, found solace in advocacy work. She became involved in organizations that supported individuals struggling with mental health issues and relationship problems. Through her work, she sought to provide support and guidance to those who might be facing similar struggles, hoping to prevent other tragedies.